Welcome to the show. Tonight, the wildest and the most biased interview yet I've seen on the ABC, and that is saying something. An ABC presenter freaking over the opposition's nuclear power plans in an interview so bad, it's almost funny.
I'm going to stop you. Forgive me for interrupting there, but this is important. No, I'm going to stop you there.
Also tonight, a new threat to our plans to get nuclear submarines, and a stunning ban in Britain on its health service changing children's gender. Shouldn't Australia do the same? Plus, an expert on Islam will tell us what this hate-preaching Sydney sheikh is really saying. And it's chilling. It's not just the threat to Jews, as you've been told. By the way, who let this bloke in? Our immigration system really is a joke. And speaking of that, you know, what should now frighten even Labor supporters is that Andrew Giles, in trouble again today, isn't even the most disastrous underperformer in this Albanese government. And the question now is this government even worse than Gough Whitlam's, which was so bad it was sacked? Is it not only dangerously ideological, but simply incompetent? And like I say, Giles isn't even the worst of the ministers, even though he might seem to you Exhibit A after this latest embarrassment. He's admitted that the 149 foreign criminals he freed from detention last year, including murderers and 37 sex offenders, were actually given invalid visas, which means at least 10 of them are going to escape prosecution for breaching their now invalid visa conditions, like not reporting to police. Clown show. Yet Prime Minister Anthony Albanese today tried both to dismiss this as just a technical issue, while trying to hint it was a mistake inherited, maybe from the Abbott coalition government.
Well, there was a technical issue, and that technical issue has been resolved. All of the visas have been issued in an appropriate way. This is a technical issue that goes back to 2013.
Total fudge. The problem with the wording of this visa actually comes from the former Rudd Labor government, and this government just cut and pasted it. Opposition leader Peter Dutton called this out, of course.
It didn't occur under a coalition government. This happened under a Labor government. Let's be very clear about it. The red herring that they've thrown out there is not factually correct. And Minister Giles and others shouldn't be in their jobs. How the Prime Minister can keep Minister Giles in his job when he's released 149 hardcore criminals into the community on the wrong visas is beyond the average Australian's comprehension.
But, you know, it's not just this that makes Giles seem a klutz. I mean, a well-meaning one, but still a klutz nevertheless. Count just some of his mistakes. Last year, the High Court ruled that Giles had to free a Burmese pedophile from immigration detention, since there was supposedly no real chance this criminal could be sent home. Giles was somehow caught unprepared for that decision, even though one judge warned him months earlier it was probably coming. So he released that pedophile, plus 148 other criminals he thought were in the same position, and released them initially without any plan to monitor or control their movement, or put them away if they proved to be in danger. He changed that later, but too late. Worse, it turned out Giles had skipped 2 meetings in his own office to discuss what to do if the High Court ruled as it did, went instead to events, including one in London, to promote Labor's doomed voice, its planned Aboriginal-only advisory parliament. But there's more. With this minister in charge of immigration, this government has let in a record 500,000 immigrants net in just 1 year, helping to cause a massive housing shortage. It's given visas to 2,000 Palestinians in terrorist-run Gaza and the West Bank during this war with Israel, with cursory checks made in as little as a day. It gave people smugglers a lot of hope just 4 days after it was elected by letting a Biloela family of fake refugees from Sri Lanka stay, and then later rewarding another 19,000 legal boat people here with permanent visas. No wonder it's since let in 2 boats of illegal immigrants just recently land on our coast. And don't forget, it also let 81 councils ban citizenship ceremonies on Australia Day, further weakening our unity. Now that is a hell of a record in less than 2 years. But if you were thinking, this bloke Giles seems a little bit keen on illegal immigrants and not keen enough on strong borders, remember, he's a former immigration lawyer who says he was inspired to get into politics by helping the illegal boat people who actually hijacked the ship, the Tampa, that had rescued them at sea and forced it to take them to Australia.
In 2001, I was a small part of a legal team that acted on behalf of the asylum seekers on the Tampa. This involvement, more than anything else, led me towards seeking election to this place.
So why is he still there? But despite all this, Giles is far from the most damaging of Albanese's ministers. That's the frightening thing. You take Chris Bowen, the Climate Change and Energy Minister. Bowen is on a crusade to pretend to save us from a pretend climate crisis by replacing our coal-fired power stations with wind and solar. Now that means as much as 90% of our baseload power will probably be gone in a decade to be replaced by, well, who knows? Bowen's rollout of wind and solar plants is way behind. His scheme of 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines to hook them all up, also way behind. His snowy 2.0 scheme to store green power was already 10 times the promised price and unfinished. And now his plan to make Australians buy more electric cars, 89% of new car sales by 2030, that's being attacked as impossible by car companies and associations. It's a mess. Now, the Australian energy market operators even warning of more blackouts from next summer. And Bowen's promise, you remember that, to cut electricity bills by $275 a household by next year? Laughable. Yet Bowen too is still the minister. And poor bad news, he's still not the government's most inept one. Because that's probably Linda Burney, the Indigenous Australians Minister. She didn't just oversee Labor's catastrophic campaign for the Voice, a racist proposal that was rejected last year by 60% of voters, with Burney totally incapable of explaining why we needed it. What else has she done, I ask you? What has she done, for instance, while crime by Aboriginal youths in towns like Alice Springs explodes? What has she done apart from this week giving us a $4 billion plan to build houses for Aborigines, a plan that works out to an astonishing $1.4 million for each house, and then to be built in remote areas, exactly where there are no good jobs? Need I go on? I mean, this is a government that is keeping us out of recession only by ramping up immigration and getting lucky on windfall prices for resources like the fossil fuels it hates. This is a government that has hammered business with pro-union restrictions that are going to keep productivity increases at lows it admits we haven't seen in 60 years. No wonder Australians last year got 1% poorer on average per person. Yet, no, it's true, all right, I admit this government does do some good things. But look at the big picture. Ask yourself, what is this government good for? I tell you, worse than Whitlam. Joining me are Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Labor leader Bill Shorten, now Director of GXO Strategies, and Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer. I've got to say, Cameron, maybe I went over the top there, but how bad does a minister have to be before Anthony Albanese sacks him?
Well, clearly, example of Giles. I mean, you know, this guy is hapless and hopeless, having not only sort of let the borders go to ruin, he's let pedophiles and assassins and slave traders into our community not once but twice. This guy is terrible, but he's also a factional hack. He's a factional Albanista, and that's all that counts for Albanese. If you're an Albanista, you can be as competent as you like, and you get to keep your job in this government.
All right, Michael. I said this government looks like being worse than Whitlam because the thing that Whitlam at least had going for him 50 years ago was, right, leave aside the incompetence and the blowing of the budget and blah, blah, and scandals. He also at least carried out big social reforms. So how does this government compare?
Well, I have to defend Albanese government. I think your memory is fading there, Andrew. I mean, Rex Connor and Jim Cairns. I mean, do we have to go through the Camloni, the whole Kerr incident? Look, I think it's the wrong benchmark. I'd actually compare their competence to the Turnbull government, which I found was probably one of the most incompetent, or the Rudd government. I think you got more recent examples of incompetence. In terms of the ministers, I'm 100% with you. The two worst ministers in this government, of course, Bowen and Burke. They're the ones that are going to cause the long-term economic damage. Now, in terms of the migration, that is incompetence, but one would hope that can be resolved, and the method of resolving is at hand, better policing, better competence in the department. But these other issues are the ones that are going to destroy our standard of living, and clearly they're supported by the Prime Minister, and that's the reason you don't see any movement in those areas. I mean, Bowen's comments this week, or yesterday, in fact, about nuclear power are just completely outrageous, at a time when you've got 440 nuclear reactors in 32 countries in the world and another 200 plus being planned. And we also have one in Australia, he forgets, at Lucas Heights that produces 20 megawatts of energy. He's out there demonising something that is critically important if you actually believe the nonsense about climate emergencies. And clearly that's what it is here. He doesn't believe this. This is all a stunt for Bowen. I mean, this bloke couldn't give away water in a desert. That's how hopeless he is. And, he's going to get away with it because Albanese supports this nonsense.
Well, Bowen and Tony Burke, I would agree, are the most dangerous in the sense of mixing incompetence or naked personal ambition with the devastating effect long-term on the economy. And I think that'll become much clearer with not much time from here. But Cameron, about this nuclear issue, right? The opposition says it wants the ban on nuclear power scrapped. And to get over Labor's scare campaign, way, would you want a nuclear power station in your backyard? No, I don't want a supermarket either, so what? It's planning to offer incentives to regions that do accept a nuclear power station where an old coal-fired power one was or still is. Incentives like discounted power for local industries. Do you think with incentives like that, the Liberals could win this argument against Labor?
Well, unfortunately, no, because unfortunately, good policy isn't necessarily good politics, Andrew. And I don't think anyone wants to live next to a coal-fired baseload power station or a hospital or a waste facility either. So there's plenty of places you can put nuclear power in Australia. The danger is the fear campaign that Labor will run. And I've been part of it myself. I ran postcards with nuclear power stations on beautiful beaches. So the fear campaign will overcome any attempt, I think, by the Liberal Party to get a sensible outcome on nuclear power. And to the point before from Michael, I mean, France has 56 reactors, America has 93. People live next to and near these facilities all the time, and they produce clean, efficient, carbonless power. And we should actually have them in Australia. We should actually have nuclear power in Australia. But unfortunately, as I said, good policy doesn't equal good politics, and the fear campaign that Labor will run against the Liberals' nuclear plan will be over the top.
Well, shame on you, Cameron Milner, for your booga booga anti-nuclear postcards. But if you
it was against Malcolm Turnbull at the time,
campaign like that, so I'm tempted to forgive you. But if you were designing a campaign like that, you must also looked at the yin opposite the yang. What would you do to make it work?
Well, I think the cost of living and the cost of energy for Australians, especially with a massive amount of renewables coming online, that's not doing anything to bring power prices down. In fact, it's skyrocketing power prices. So if you compared apple with apples, so take away all the subsidies, all the taxpayer money, all the gold that we give to the renewable sector, and compare and let the market decide between nuclear power and renewable power without subsidies, then I think Australians would see just how cost efficient nuclear power would be. And indeed, you get to net zero as well. So you not only do decarbonise, but you also have cheap, reliable power, like so many nations across the world do, safely every single day.
You see, Michael, what frustrates me, here's Cameron talking positively about at least letting nuclear power be an option. It's interesting that Graham Richardson, the former, underlined former, which makes all the difference, Federal Labor Environment Minister, actually attacked Albanese's flat no to go nuclear. Here he is today.
You're not going to stop nuclear power by sticking your head in the sand and saying, I don't like it.
See, Michael, you can't tell me that there aren't Labor ministers right now who know nuclear makes sense and are just spreading lies and fear campaigns instead. Can Labor really keep saying no?
Well, there certainly is Labor ministers and Labor Party members, because I was involved in debates 20 years ago in the New South Wales right and also at national level about nuclear power around the Three Mines arrangement. So there are people that support nuclear power. The issue I think that Cameron raises is an important issue. And by the way, I've got to a power station behind me and a power station in front of me within 5 kilometres, and an old power station site about 5 kilometres away as well. So I'm one of these people that he's got to convince, and I wouldn't be convinced by cheaper power. I think the issue here is a political issue. He needs to focus very clearly on lifting the ban. I think that's all he needs to do, and argue that the ban, once it's lifted, lets the market, as Cameron said, and as I've said on many occasions, decide this. It may well be that nuclear power doesn't work out from a financial point of view, but once you remove the subsidies, you will know. And until he does that, he's climate doomsday cult is exposed for what it is. It's climate fear-mongering, because they're not interested in the one technology that can actually do something.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. Cameron, just before we go, I'm out of time, but I need to ask you about this. Our deal with the US to buy some of its new Virginia-class nuclear submarines off the production line, is it falling apart? Because the Biden administration says it's just going to buy one of these Virginia subs next year. It had planned to buy 2, meaning it's going to be behind schedule in building up its own fleet by the time we're supposed to butt in and buy our first submarine in 8 years from now. Are we in trouble?
Look, I think we are, and I think we're in trouble because so many of Albanese's ministers are weak on China. I mean, Richard Marles will be running study tours in Shanghai by the time we have our first nuclear submarine from the US. He doesn't really care about AUKUS. He mouths the words but doesn't deliver. That's what I'm really worried about. We need this deal. Australia needs this deal for our defence against China, but I'm worried that Albanese ministers aren't as convinced as the rest of Australia is.
Well, if we're trying to go soft on the China threat, why would we need the submarines in the first place? That's the problem. Michael Costa, Cameron Milner.
Unless you want to kowtow to Beijing.
Really appreciate that. No, that's true.
Thanks, Andrew.
Now to another issue, the radical trans movement, the transgender movement. It's being pushed back, but not here yet. In Britain, the National Health Service has banned gender identity clinics from giving puberty blockers to children. Now, puberty blockers do things like they stop girls from developing breasts. They stop boys from getting facial hair with puberty. And this comes after a damning review led by Dr. Hilary Cass in 2020 of gender identity services for children in Britain. And the results were shocking. She said there just wasn't enough evidence for a start about what these drugs were actually doing to children and young people, or if they even helped. And then you also had people, some have been on the show, who've gone through the whole process, even later having their breasts removed or their genitals surgically removed or changed. They were saying, look, they regretted the whole thing. And whistleblowers in gender identity clinics lately have been saying children have been pushed into getting this so-called treatment.
There is absolutely no way that these patients were in the right mental place to be able to make any long-term decisions about their health, let alone decisions about gender transitioning as a child.
Joining me is Andrew Amos, who's an academic psychiatrist who co-authored a paper in the journal Australasian Psychiatry. We've talked about that before, a paper warning that there was too much politics and not enough science in helping children change gender. Andrew Amos, thanks for joining us again. How important is this decision in Britain?
Oh, g'day, Andrew. Look, I think the decision to ban puberty blockers in England will turn out to be crucial in England, but also in Australia. It's obviously good news for English kids who'll no longer be put at risk of serious physical and psychological harms, but even more important, it'll interrupt the gender-affirming treadmill that drags confused young people away from normal development and towards a lifetime of harmful medications and surgeries. So that's good news for the English kids. But to put this in context, it's been reported that right now there's only about 100 English kids on puberty blockers at all. And I've got a new paper coming out that reports a massive increase in the number of Australian kids being given puberty blockers. So in 2023, for example, 172 kids were started on puberty blockers in the Queensland public health system alone. Now, it's difficult to know exactly how many kids are affected across Australia's public and private systems because we essentially had to use freedom of information requests to get any data on this, but it has to be at least many hundreds more each year. So it's a big problem in Australia and it's getting worse.
So Britain's got 2.5 times our population. It's only got 100 kids on this. we have got hundreds. I mean, that's just extraordinary. I want to pick you up on something you said. Damaged, vulnerable children are being treated. This worries me. You know, the way it's often presented in the media, they're happy, well-adjusted children from good homes, loving homes, and they know they're pretty wise to what's going on, and they make a conscious, rational decision. I'm in the wrong body, I want to change. What sort of children are we really talking about?
Look, it's a really good question. One of the big problems in this area, of course, is that the advocates have done such a good job at preventing quality research. We're probably widely underestimating the number of kids who are being diagnosed with other serious psychiatric conditions instead of or as well as gender dysphoria. So many of these kids turn out to have other serious psychiatric problems, including autism, but also personality disorders, bipolar disorder, psychosis. So one of the more interesting theories about gender confusion is that it has more to do with early trauma, particularly sexual abuse, and with home environments that don't enforce traditional boundaries than it does with any inborn characteristics of individual kids. So what that means, and what the English ban is intended to do, is to allow scientists to start answering some of these questions before we implement these very damaging and lifelong medication and surgical procedures.
Also lets the children mature and think longer and harder, and as they get hopefully wiser and get more psychiatric help, etc. Maybe because I remember I interviewed Hannah Barnes, who wrote a BBC journalist who wrote a book about all this, about the scandal in Britain. And in her book, it says, she reports that up to a third of children at a Tavistock unit were autistic, for instance. Many were from broken homes. I mean, these are vulnerable children. The question is, why do you think changing gender, as if that's if that's possible, has been pushed so hard even on such vulnerable children? Where does the politics come from?
Well, look, that's a very complicated question, but the basic reason this is so political is because gender-affirming advocates have made a very strategic use of medical systems in Western countries to bypass usual medical safeguards, and they're really pushing a political point of view. So essentially, what's happened in Australia is activist clinicians, often identifying as transgender themselves, have realised that a very small number of highly motivated doctors can take over the decision-making process at medical colleges like my college psychiatrists. And that allows them then to endorse whatever medical practices they like, using the college as a mouthpiece, essentially. So once a few medical colleges in Australia endorsed what's called the gender-affirming care model, which is what's used to justify puberty blockers, essentially then, and this occurred about 5 or 6 years ago, Australian hospitals and health systems then started to implement it, even though there was no good evidence for it. So once that happens, courts start to describe it as the standard of care, and health bureaucracies enshrine it in their protocols. So now that it has sort of legal and bureaucratic armour, it's really going to take a concerted effort by politicians with a lot more than usual courage to pass legislation that will reverse these bad decisions and to ignore the fierce criticism that they'll get from very vocal activists.
And the courage comes from being called, a bigot, a heartless, a transphobe, etc., etc. And don't forget, I've talked to a professional dealing with some girls that thought they were transgender. I'm told, it's almost like a fashion among children that are feeling a little lost at school, way of getting attention as well. Let's not forget that. But, what consequences. Andrew Amos, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, the most outrageously biased interview I have yet seen. I mean, Sarah Ferguson, you're a Labor shill or an anti-nuclear hysteric. And, well, see if you agree with me after this. Now, we just had a victory. Hot news just off the press. You remember that Irish comedian we talked to this week, Graham Linehan, Father Ted creator. He finally has got his visa. Second attempt, what is it now, 18 days waiting, 19, way over the average. Finally got it after we drew attention to this ludicrous decision because, of course, he's against women who are born women having to play sport, for instance, against women born men. Crazy stuff, crazy stuff. Anyway, he's in. So it'll be, we'll have him on the show to celebrate. Now, the ABC is meant by law to be impartial because we all have to fund it through our taxes. You, me, everyone, left, right, don't cares. Yet it's been hijacked by the left, as is clear from even its top stars, like Sarah Ferguson, who devoted 3 entire programs, you might remember, to pushing a total hoax that Donald Trump became US president by colluding with Russia. Last night, though, Ferguson, now host of the ABC 7:30, topped even that effort. She was supposed to be interviewing the federal opposition's energy minister, Ted O'Brien, about the opposition's plan to allow nuclear power in Australia. But she couldn't let him speak for even 15 seconds before interrupting him for the first of many times, after asking him a simple question, how long it would take to build a nuclear reactor here.
So the advice we've received from the best experts in the world is that small modular reactors could be constructed between about 3 to 5 years, large reactors 6 to 12 years.
I'm just going to stop you.
Ferguson then spent 50 seconds telling O'Brien how wrong he was before letting him talk for a few more seconds and then interrupting him again and again.
Just to finish my earlier response, construction 3 to 5 SMRs.
And that's small modular reactors.
3 to 5 years for small modular reactors. 6 to 12 years for large reactors. And as I was about to say, that is the advice of ANSTO. That is the advice of the Albanese government's nuclear agency.
Not from a standing start. So let's
construction, right? So so before construction, you're right. You do need to stand up a regulator and so forth.
I'm just going to ask you a question now.
Can I answer that question?
Let me just say this one thing, because I think this is very important for the audience. And forgive me for interrupting there.
O'Brien must have been doing too well, because then came a Ferguson lecture suggesting he was actually a liar.
Being straightforward about the detail and not trying to snow people seems to be incredibly important. So why would you start off by saying, not here, but out there in making public statements that you can do it in under 10 years when you know you can't?
That's not true, Sarah, with all due respect.
And this time Ferguson let O'Brien speak for a whole 17 seconds, so generous, before interrupting him yet again when he dared to, oh no, criticise the Labor's Energy Minister, Chris Bowen.
We are in a mess because we have somebody with one-liners trying to run the system.
To be fair to him, he was talking about a whole series of things. That was the thing.
No, that was specific. That was specific to nuclear, Sarah. And this is the issue, because we have a government right now who is refusing to have a mature debate.
All right.
I mean, let's
have it.
But let me make this point.
Yeah.
Australians right now are paying among the highest energy prices in the world. We already have blackouts, it's getting worse, and our renewables target is failing.
And we have this government to talk about nuclear energy. So let's not waste time talking about the government for the moment. No, I'm going to stop you there, because I want to talk about...
I will now shift to nuclear, but to make the point, that is the problem we need to solve.
Yes.
In comes zero emissions nuclear energy, not as a silver bullet.
Well,
Got to stop you making a criticism of Bowen on the government's record or the government's power play. Oh, no. I mean, joining me is Sophie Ellsworth, media writer of the Australian newspaper. Sophie, I mean, how would you describe what you saw last night? Was it an interview? Was it a debate, actually? Was it maybe just a harangue, an ignorant, intolerant and biased shout-down? How would you describe it?
Well, Andrew, it was pretty difficult to comprehend as a viewer what Ted O'Brien was trying to get across, and it felt like, as a viewer, that Sarah Ferguson was badgering him rather than interviewing him. Now, this afternoon, I've looked at the ABC's editorial policies on interviewing styles, and it says, Andrew, you can interrupt when appropriate, but make sure you don't badger one interviewee and mollycoddle another. So I guess what we'd like to see is Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen on in the coming days to see if he gets similar treatment, Andrew. And also, I would like to see Paul Barry over at Media Watch unpack this interview, because I felt like this was one of the hardest interviews to watch with Sarah Ferguson. You couldn't understand what the Shadow Minister was really trying to prosecute because she had this combative approach where she just kept interrupting him, Andrew, and that's not good for the viewers. It's not good for the subject matter. And I think the ABC need to say this is actually not okay. We pay for the ABC. We pay for the 7:30 report. And I'd argue that was a pretty bad interview.
Yeah, Ferguson spoke for half the time, half the interview time. Can you believe it? And you said, oh, you want to see Chris Bowen. The last time he was on, she ended the interview by saying, good luck. I mean, fair dinkum. Let's go back to the interview. There's still 6 minutes of it to go. Let's see if Ferguson has got around to letting O'Brien speak without heckling every time he's actually making a very good point.
We are looking at 90%, 90%, of our baseload energy exiting the grid by 2034. So we're talking within a decade, 90% of our baseload energy gone because of Labor's policy settings. Now, Sarah, the lights will go out.
But hang on, are you saying...
The lights will go out if that happens.
It is going to be coalition policy that you will keep those coal-fired power stations running longer than the dates that have been set in train now?
No, they're your words.
I mean, they're the decisions taken by the companies and the organisations that run those power stations, and they've set dates for them.
Let me clarify if I can. Is that all right?
Yes, of course.
It's just, how did you rate O'Brien's performance, by the way?
Well, I must say, Andrew, I thought he was pretty polite given the circumstances, but he didn't really have a chance to really get across what he was trying to argue. Had that been Peter Dutton, we've seen Peter Dutton call out the ABC numerous times for what he describes as bias. So this is a problem for the ABC, and this is where it must fall down to the news director, Justin Stevens. And I would expect, Andrew, that there'll be complaints to the ABC Ombudsman about that interview, because I do not think that was a fair interview. Whatever his views are, we don't have to agree with them, but let him get his side across and then challenge him on those points, sure. But I felt like that did not happen fairly.
No, she seemed to panic every time she was making a good point and wouldn't let him finish it. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for your time. Seriously. After the break, what has been missed in reports on the hate preaching of this Islamic preacher in Sydney? What's missed, this is actually threatening a lot of you as well. So why isn't he charged? And, oh, listen, before we go to the break, let's just hear one more time. Is Sarah Ferguson yet letting the Liberals speak?
It is the consumer. And this is where this is where Labor. This is where Labor gets it wrong. You put the consumer. I'm going to have to interrupt you there.
Well, no. Well, we'll try one more time after this. Welcome back. We'll look in a second at that hate preaching of the Islamic preacher in Sydney, who something people have missed there. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Shari.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, despite stumbles, gaffes and serious questions around his mental capacity, Joe Biden has clinched the Democratic nomination. I'll cross live to Adam Crichton in Washington and speak with the Australian's Paul Kelly, who says this is a sign of a fractured America. I'll see you at 8.
Why Abdul Salam Zaud was let into Australia from Palestine beats me. He became a preacher, an Islamic preacher for hardline groups, met terrorists like the Bali bombers' religious leader, although he insists he's against terrorism. He's now an Imam in Sydney, where last month he told his followers what he really thought about Jews.
وعادت الشعوب مرة أخرى تناكف اليهود وتتكلم عن صهيونيتهم وعدائهم وقتلهم وعدم رحمتهم للخلق وأنهم عدو مجرم متوحش صائل ظالم.
Not charged with hate speech, nothing. Maybe that's because he's just seemed a Jew hater and that's now so fashionable. But he actually also made clear what I've warned for years, like first they come for the Jews, but really they're going to come, people like that, for anyone who's not Muslim. First, this praise of jihad to make sure Islam ruled over all religions.
أنه لا حل إلا بالجهاد في سبيل الله فهذا المقصود من القتال والجهاد لأعداء الدين أن يدفع شرهم عن الدين وأن يذب عن دين الله الذي خلق الخلق له حتى يكون هو العالي على سائر الأديان.
And then this, listing all the religions he thought the 800,000 Muslims here should be fighting.
قتادة قال الأديان 6 5 للشيطان وواحد للرحمن فاليهود والنصارى والصابئة والمجوس والمشركين من بوذ وسيخ وهندوس ولا دينيين كلهم ضدك أيها المسلم.
Even fight the atheists, note that as well. But have I interpreted all this correctly? Joining me is Mark Dury. He's an Anglican pastor who holds doctorates in linguistics and Quranic theology. He has actually written a superb history of the writing of the Quran and its biblical reflexes. I really recommend that. He's also taught Islamic studies at the Melbourne School of Theology. Mark, great to see you again. You've heard the clips I've played of Sheikh Zayed. What is he telling us really?
Yes, he is telling us 4 things in his recent sermon. Firstly, the Jews are evil killers, bloodthirsty, treacherous, barbarous. And secondly, Islam's destiny is to rule over all other religions, including atheists, as you point out. Third, the only way, in fact, he says the God-given way for Muslims to fulfill this destiny to rule is through jihad. And the fourth point is that Muslims should prepare for this jihad. They should be ready for it.
Well, some people say jihad is just, an internal, be holy, that kind of thing, be religious, not what many of us might take it to mean, actually hurting people.
Yeah, he means by military conquest, establishing the political and military sovereignty of Islam over other powers. It's absolutely clear that's what he intends.
Now, many journalists would say, well, look, please, guys, we're just talking here about an extremist. Or is he actually preaching authentic Islamic scripture and teachings?
Well, Imam Abdus Salam is a serious scholar of Islam. He's a member of the mainstream Australian National Imams Council, which only admits Muslim scholars who have recognised qualifications. He's a senior member of the National Imam Council's Expert Fatwa Council, which shows that he's recognised by the other Imams of Australia to have superior expertise on Islam and is an authority even amongst the Imams. Now, of course, his views are not held by all Muslims. There'd be Muslims who are appalled by them, but his views are both credible and authentic. They're credible because the number of Muslims who hold those views is not small, and they're also credible because he's highly qualified to speak for Islam. And they're authentic because they are grounded in Islam's fundamental text, the Quran and Muhammad's teaching. For example, when he says that Islam was created to reign supreme over all other religions, he's paraphrasing the Quran, Surah 61, verse 9, which says exactly that. And his comments on the Jews are also informed by what the Quran says about the Jews. Let me put it this way. If someone made out a religious vilification complaint against Imam Abdus Salam in Victoria using its Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, he would and could defend himself on the grounds that he's a recognised expert on Islam, his statements were made reasonably and in good faith for a genuine religious purpose. He is certainly not a misunderstander or distorter of Islam, according to his own sincerely held beliefs. And the question is, what are we going to do about that? What is Australia going to do about this?
Well, you raise a question that I've been puzzling over for a while now. And for me, it helps to explain why he isn't. And people like him because we've featured other similar, preachers who you might say are extreme. Why he isn't charged with hate crimes or inciting violence or something like that. And for me, it's this. Is it because if he's charged for correctly interpreting Islamic texts, as you suggest, in the eyes of many Muslims, if not all, then wouldn't our political class have to admit that the problem isn't really with this guy or this hothead or this crazy over here? The problem is with Islam itself, and that becomes far too hard to deal with.
Yes, it is very hard to deal with. And the police have gone through 25 years of sensitivity training to become to build good relationships with the Muslim community and to bring out into the light of day that there are people preaching this sort of ideology, which is really designed to destroy Australia as we know it and to replace it with something completely different. To bring that out into the open is, setting the cat amongst the pigeons. We don't know what to do about it. We've got no plan for this. This is not what we expected. It's not what we wanted, and so we've got nowhere to go. It's this very sad situation. The problem is we don't have sedition laws that we can use and apply. There are other countries like Singapore who would not tolerate this sort of preaching. They recognise the implications of it, but we are unable to act.
Yes, well, I think you're wrong. The policy is hear no evil, see no evil, and absolutely don't do anything about it. Mark Dury, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
After the break, and not entirely unrelated, the head of the Anglican Church is accused of turning a blind eye to fraud by illegal Muslim immigrants being baptised as Christians in job lots so that they can claim to be refugees. But before then, one last time, has the ABC's Sarah Ferguson finally let the Liberals' Ted O'Brien get a word in?
If you look at the relief that's provided, it's actually due to contracts signed with renewables.
And the ABC complains, why do so few Conservatives come, accept their invitations to come on? Because you guys are sanctimonious blowhards who are too scared to let your audience actually hear the other side and decide for themselves. But now to a troublesome Christian, the head of the Anglican Church, Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury. He's accused of turning a blind eye to a fraud, his church baptising illegal immigrants from the Muslim Middle East so they can claim to be refugees from persecution. That's a claim of Reverend Matthew Firth to a Home Affairs Select Committee of Britain's Parliament this week.
Week in, week out, significant groups of mainly Iranian and Syrian young male asylum seekers were being brought to me in sizable cohorts at a time sort of 6 or 7 people brought to me by people saying that these need baptism, these people need baptism.
Joining me from London is Patrick Christie, star presenter at GB News, which its boss just texted me to say has beaten rival Sky News, left wing, not this Sky News, Britain's Sky News, 6 times out of 8 days. So congratulations to you, Patrick. I've texted back, it's all about you. What is the claim against Justin Welby?
Yeah, so the claim against Justin Welby is that he is at best naive, at worst complicit in a fake asylum seeker conveyor belt that is, frankly, allowing failed asylum seekers to pretend to convert to Christianity, to game the Home Office and wider society in order to stay in Britain. So the allegation is that right across the Church of England, there are people who are fraudulently baptising individuals. At times there are, quotes, Muslim men with bags of cash at the back of churches, wheeling in these blokes saying these need to be baptised, these need to be baptised, all of whom have previously failed their asylum claims, by the way. Then, a ready army of incredibly woke vicars are happy to do them the old dunk in the water and maybe confirm them, and then never see them again. This has been an issue because there was one chap who was lost by the church and re-emerged when he blew himself up outside a maternity hospital in Liverpool, Europe's largest maternity hospital. So there are serious security concerns here. There's also a wider concern, Andrew, as well, that now charities that specialise in failed asylum seekers are actually operating from within churches as well, using the church as an office. And what would happen is these people would get baptised, they would take a load of photos of them during the baptism, they would then, miraculously, pun intended, get a phone call from some lawyers to the church, putting massive pressure on the vicar, saying, do you know if this person gets deported back to wherever they're from in the Middle East, they're going to suffer massive, massive persecution. We have to keep them in this country. It is a conveyor belt. It is, frankly, completely wrong. And it's actually dangerous as well for a lot of people. And it's doing the opposite as well. I mean, if anything, it is aiding with the Islamification of Britain, not actually doing anything to promote the Christian faith.
Well, these are allegations. Have they been put to Archbishop Welby? What's his response been?
Yeah, so the response initially was deny, deny, deny. Now they're saying they're going to have an urgent review. What they will say is, and are saying, is that these are at best isolated cases. They do not recognise this situation entirely, and therefore they are going to have a look into it, and we'll have to follow some form of due process. I think it's important to have a little bit of context here, though, about Archbishop Welby. He's dead against our Rwanda plan, which is looking to essentially deport illegal immigrants to Rwanda. He's also come out and said that that's ungodly. He even referenced the Nazis. I think when someone references the Nazis, you know that they've got really nothing else. But he did reference the Nazis in relation to our government's Rwanda plan in the House of Lords the other day. So this is the kind of guy he is. Massive pushback in this country against him, though, Andrew. Very recently, he was tweeting about he wishes everyone a happy Ramadan. Fine, nothing wrong with that. But he also tweeted about the Nigerian Christians who are being killed by Islamists, and it is Islamists. He refused to call them that. He called them gangs. So some people are very concerned that this guy is maybe a bit too woke and isn't doing his best to stop this.
Well, there was, 350 kids that were kidnapped, I think a week or two ago in Nigeria. I don't notice crowds in the street marching for them. Well, it's funny, you know, why is he against the Rwanda plan? That is, we would send them to Nauru, our illegal immigrants. Well, Rwanda is actually a Christian country. All these recently converted people will fit in right into Rwanda. It's probably more Christian now than Britain. So I don't know what Welby's against that for suddenly. I don't get it. But tell me about Catherine, Princess of Wales. Look, Patrick, I've covered this for a couple of days. I'm struggling to see why this is such a worldwide scandal, long chins being stroked. You know, she photoshopped a few bits of a photo of her with the children. So what? Now, to add to the drama, here comes Harry and Meghan Markle, or their mouthpieces and water carriers. What are they up to?
Yeah, look, what we do know is that Catherine is obviously very unwell. And I think it's reasonable also to suspect that she is even more unwell than we thought, hence why we're in this situation now. Conspiracy theories are abound on all of this. Step forward, Harry and Meghan / their mouthpieces and sources close to the two of them to say, oh, this Photoshop scandal, you know, this PR disaster would never have happened to Harry and Meghan. Excuse me, they have been embroiled in a string of PR disasters. They are about as popular as a fart in a lift now, despite originally being so popular that we paid for their wedding, right? So I wouldn't really be taking PR advice from those two, okay? And you do have to raise serious questions. If Kate is as unwell as everybody now suspects, okay, why on earth would they allow a comment like that to be put out about her? I really do think that is, frankly, very, very wrong. There is big concern for Kate, and in any kind of information vacuum, then obviously conspiracy theorists fill that vacuum. The problem is you do have to start raising serious questions. Why are they not giving us more information? And the only obvious conclusion I can draw from that is that there is something very serious going on. And at the end of the day, these people are human beings. Kate and William are human beings. And I think we do have to respect the idea that there needs to be some elements of privacy when it comes to that. You know, I think we need to show a bit more respect there.
Patrick Christie, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Well, that's it from me. Joe Biden has just confirmed he's got the numbers now. The nomination locked up. He will be the candidate unless God strikes before the US presidential election. Up next is Shari with the latest on this presidential race.